Hello and welcome to our latest webinar, The Art of Collaboration, Content and Collaboration, a conversation with Simon Norris, CEO and founder of Nomensa, and Lauren Ellis, Nomensa's senior content designer, hosted by me, Henry Carroll. So, as we know, the nature of digital work requires a collaborative mindset and skills in collaboration. Organisations encourage collaboration because it results in better team working, building shared purpose, capability, and psychological safety. But what can content teach us about collaboration? So in this session, Simon and Lauren will look at collaboration with a focus on content and how the practices and tools can lead to better content delivery and ultimately collaboration. As always, please do join us. I'm joining the discussion in the chat. Make sure your settings are switched to panelists and attendees so everyone can see your messages. And let us know if you have any issues with audio or anything like that during the session. Also, if you've got any questions for Simon and Lauren, please submit them using the Q&A function, and I'll run through as many as I can with them at the end. So, Simon and Lauren, let's start at the very beginning and kick things off with the definition of collaboration. So, Si, in your collaboration blog series, you mentioned the definition of collaboration as the action of working with someone to produce something. But great collaboration requires more than just working alongside someone, right?
Yeah. So in the series, I really wanted to sort of start it with a very simple definition that makes sense to everyone, that everyone can agree on. Then if you kind of flip that, what's interesting is that, you ask someone, are you collaborative? They're going to say yes. Do you work in a collaborative way? They say yes. Do you work in a collaborative organization? They say yes. So there's something very interesting going on here for me that sort of belies or undermines the real value and importance of collaboration. I mean, those that have seen me talk about collaboration, I mean, we run a conference called Collaborate. So it's something that I think is really important. I think of collaboration as a superpower. So for me, I think of collaboration not just as an act, but an act that has different levels of skill that can be applied. And by that, what I mean is that you can think about collaboration from the individual perspective. You can think about collaboration from a team perspective, and you can think about collaboration from an organizational perspective. And there are differences and similarities between them. Ultimately, if I think about it as leader of Nomensa, how do I encourage collaboration? Well, that means that we've got to sort of set policy and structure in place so that people can act collaboratively, that they feel that they can act collaboratively. And that's really kind of important, because it means that we have to sort of encourage those skills and characteristics that make up in individual collaboration, skills such as problem solving, adaptability, listening. These are really critical skills that sort of support individual collaboration, which we know then combine to help us kind of make more collaborative teams, and actually kind of the foundation on how you would measure, say, the collaboration capability of a whole organization. So that's kind of how I think about it in terms of trying to think about it in terms of individual, team, and organizational collaboration. And ultimately, we're talking about content today. So the thing is, well, what's the relationship between content and collaboration? And specifically, what I mean there is, how can collaboration help us deliver better content? And actually then by extension deliver better experiences. So the definition is simple in the beginning, but I think there's a lot more to collaboration than that definition. And hopefully I for those that have read this series will kind of agree with that point.
Awesome, thanks, Si. So Si, I mean, you just mentioned experience in content. Lauren, kind of what's your take on this? Like what's more important, experience or content?
So that's a really good question, and it's one that's kind of been endlessly debated, but asking which is more important or which kind of discipline fits into which is more, I think, to do with studio resourcing or kind of business management for me than an actual debate. You know, content is UX and UX is content. You can't have one without the other. It's kind of a chicken and the egg situation, and reducing either of them down to a deliverable or tool kind of misses the point. So content is the experience, and the experience of kind of any digital product or service is built through interlinking content, you know, whether that's a strapline of microcopy, a button, a video, image, article, or a kind of entire user journey. The customer experience is built through the accumulation of these micro interactions, and customers don't see organizations as a single screen, page, or product. They see it as the whole. And so we as practitioners also need to see it as a whole. We kind of ricochet quite often as an industry between thinking that content is either this kind of supreme thing or that it's just an inconsequential part of the design process. But for me, I really think there's like a middle way where maybe a little bit biased because obviously I'm a content practitioner, but for me, it's not a singular activity or kind of a thing that you do at a set point in a project. Instead, content can be something that's a framework or kind of a common language or a kind of linguistic glue that can really bring a team together. It's more than just the words that appear in a customer-facing service. You know, it permeates all of your processes and it determines your kind of collaborative capacity. And dwelling on the intricacies of language can not only shape and improve those customer experiences, but it can also really enhance team dynamics as well. And not to mention like organizational capability as well. And for me, there's like a analogy I like to use, and I like to think of the way that kind of content design and UX and kind of all the other disciplines, they kind of fit together in the way that elements do within a cathedral. So those who aren't like really into architecture, there are several essential features that you need kind of for a cathedral to be considered a cathedral. You have, it's almost always built on like an east-west axis. That's difficult to say. It's always in a city. You have a bishop there that oversees everything. And then you have things like chapels and prayer chambers and transepts and aisles. Things like stained glass windows, you know, those cherubs that everyone loves, and gargoyles. And while these objects all technically exist in their own right, without a combination of them, a cathedral is just another building. And in this way, a cathedral is kind of a design system that's made up of predetermined parts, but they can be rebuilt in a myriad of forms, and they only really gain their full meaning from the way that they're constructed. You know, a nave is kind of only really makes sense when it's viewed in its context. And what makes a narthex different to a common lobby is its situatedness. So whether you think that kind of cathedrals have a spiritual heaviness or it's just like a myth, it is really up to you. But we can see it as a kind of library of shared components, or kind of like just out, where the cathedral is not only greater than the sum of its parts, but the meaning of those parts are transformed by the nature of the whole. And just as a cathedral can't be reduced to a single attribute, an organization is also never defined by a single product or service. Everything we like design, write, or build contributes not only to internal culture, but the way that we're perceived by the world and our customers. And so kind of as practitioners, we need to think holistically. And that means like not treating any of those disciplines as siloed practices. You know, they're together, they're a whole.
Awesome, thanks, Lauren. No, I love that analogy. Simon, I know you're also a big fan of an analogy, and you also kind of provide one in your kind of collaboration blog series, which also kind of really helps underline this kind of Gestalt, this Gestalt thinking. Could you talk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, just to plus what Lauren said there, I think the cathedral does represent something bigger and greater than all the actual parts that make the cathedral up. So you've got that classic idea from a Gestalt perspective where the total is greater than the sum of the parts. And this is kind of, this is really, really important. And from a collaboration perspective, it underlines this idea that collaboration is a superpower. The kind of sandwich analogy, yeah, I kind of wanted to come up with something that will be so obvious to everyone that hopefully everyone has done in one way or another. But if I ask the question, how many people make the sandwich when you go and buy your lunchtime sandwich, it seems really simple. And you might say, well, duh, Simon, it's like one person because I can see them making it. And yeah, at a certain level, that's true. That's truth. Here's one person. I see them making it as well. But I'll ask the question again, how many people actually make that sandwich? Because when you sort of extend the analogy that a sandwich is the whole and it's made up of parts, bread, cheese, vegetables, whatever you prefer or you want to have in your sandwich, then you start to think, well, actually, where does the bread come from? And where does the flour that makes the bread come from? Where does the cheese come from? Where do all these parts come from? And that should kind of then lead you to this idea that all those things are kind of contributed by many other hands, many other people. So even though you can't see the collaboration because a sandwich is made by one person, there are many people that are supporting the act of that single sandwich being made. So it's supremely collaborative. And that's kind of, that's really kind of interesting, because to think in this way, you have to kind of cultivate this big picture thinking, this Gestalt way of thinking. You have to think in a very holistic way. And that doesn't mean that you don't pay attention to the details, which is often kind of one of the things that I hear. Big picture thinking means lack of detail. No, it doesn't mean that. What big picture or Gestalt thinking means, you understand the parts and how they make up the whole, and then more importantly, the relationships between the whole and the parts. That's the key idea. So again, it kind of builds on what Lauren was saying. We're trying to understand relationships. So really trying to understand how things work in a relational way. And that's really important, because that's kind of how collaboration works. It's relational. It's about choreography of action by many people to get together. So if we kind of understand how these relationships work and we understand what other people do, then we are beginning to practice being more collaborative straight away, because we're not just focusing on ourselves, we're actually taking the bigger view.
I think so. I mean, I'd love to know kind of, what all this kind of has to do with collaboration in practice, though. Lauren, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I'm happy to hear Simon call it a relationship, because that's kind of ultimately what it is. And what we aim to do is collaborate with our clients, who will then in turn collaborate with our customers. And when we talk about like systems, it can sound quite abstract, but really what we're talking about is collections of people. The way that these people kind of function and work together when they're collaborating, whether that's designing a website or making a sandwich, really matters. And humans evolve to operate best in groups, so working in a group does kind of come naturally to us. But if the group engulfs too much of the individual, then we lose diversity of thought and creativity quite often. And there's kind of this constant balance we somehow need to strike, where we maintain our independence within a team or organization, but we still take on enough of that group to feel like we're a part of them. Lots of people on this call will probably be very familiar with like self-determination theory. It's like a really old, famous, very well-loved theory. But it basically says that humans need three things to feel contented, and that is autonomy. We need to feel like we are authentic in our lives and work. We want to feel like we're competent. So we want to know that we're good at what we do and that other people recognize it. And really, we need a sense of belonging. We need purpose and we need community. But on the flip side of that, we also need the ability to decide for ourselves, like who we are, how we want to work, and what we do. And kind of on the surface, this can seem like the antithesis of collaboration in quite like a individualistic way of approaching work. But really, by working out what works for us individually, we're able to kind of lay the foundations for doing good work with others. I think it was Nietzsche who said that we were like a different face for every person that we meet. And while to a degree this is true, it's also quite exhausting. When we have to siphon off parts of ourselves to fit into a collective, it's not only emotionally demanding, it's also quite damaging to our brains. And so we shouldn't have to hide parts of ourselves to get a job done, when in reality, it's always been kind of weirdos and oddballs that create the best designs and come up with the most interesting ideas. There's actually one of the things I really value about Nomensa's culture. The individual is encouraged, individuality is encouraged, and we benefit from the diversity of thought, whether it's our kind of varied academic backgrounds or personal backgrounds. you've got a value that's kind of written all over the walls in the office, that's be human. And this does apply to the way that we design, but it's also the way we work with each other. You know, we get to be authentic in the way that we show up to each other and embrace like whatever strange thing it is that we're passionate about. I mean, kind of, I think just before the pandemic or a little bit into it, I got to do a talk at Interact Global, which was about designing for dead people. And I'm not sure how many organizations would reply kind of, yeah, sure, go ahead, let's see what you can do with it, to someone who basically wants to spend an hour talking about how the history of graveyard design applies to our practice now as UX designers, and how we basically need to weave mortality into all the technology we create. And this is ultimately like that kind of like one team mentality in action. And it really needs to extend beyond just our practitioners and just the people we work with, like in our office or in the organization we're in. For us who work in like an agency, it needs to include our kind of clients and stakeholders as well. And it's really vital that we have kind of as much empathy for them as we do for our end users and also the customers they serve. Quite often see like stakeholders kind of already know and feel frustrated by things like how complex, technical, or confusing their content is. They hear it from their staff, their bosses, their users, like every day. And sometimes it's stayed the same because they don't know how to fix the problem or they don't have the resources for it. But sometimes there are very valid reasons why things haven't changed yet. If you take like legal or kind of clinical or policy content, if you if you shift the language even slightly, you can create ripples across policies and claims and result in court rulings sometimes. And it's simple for us to come in and say, you know, you need to make this simpler, it needs to be more user-centered. But sometimes swapping out a word for a simpler one can have like really far wide-reaching consequences. This doesn't necessarily mean that we should kind of just admit defeat and not try and improve anything, but it just means that we need to bring these people into the room and understand why things haven't changed yet. And, you know, what happened when they tried to change things before? Did they run into like any roadblocks, and what can we do differently now? If you come in like a bull in a china shop being like, oh, how do you not know how to fix this? Or this is really simple. We're kind of liable to alienate the people we're trying to help. So we really need to adopt a collaborative mindset that kind of brings them in and shows that we're trying to work with them to solve a problem instead of trying to ascribe blame. And so literally just having empathy for both your end user and your stakeholder, it's just really essential. And unless we kind of like work together, we can't figure out how we can move things from kind of like what is to what could be.
Thank you, Lauren. That's great. Simon, have you got any kind of more thoughts on kind of collaboration in practice?
Yeah, I mean, let's just plus what Lauren said there. I mean, it is easy to go in and say, hey, you're wrong, we're going to do it better. And in fact, it's probably the most offensive thing that I think you could ever hear, ever. It's not about right or wrong. It's, to Lauren's point, it's about understanding. It's about being able to listen, and it's about bringing a sort of problem-solving expertise to the fore. So you get a sense of what's been tried. Often when things don't work, it's not because organizations don't have smart people that are highly capable and enthusiastic and well motivated. There could be a whole range of things, and it's a case of really trying to get into those sort of those details from a collaboration perspective and think, well, actually, how could things be reorganized? What bits could we bring that add value and difference that could be that kind of difference? It's about being less assumptive and more empathetic, as Lauren says. And one of the ways that I explain that and encourage that in the Mensa is in this concept of cognitive diversity. So I don't mean it in terms of ethnic diversity. I'm not talking about gender or race or all the things that go with actual ethnic diversity. I'm talking about cognitive diversity, how we think, how we problem solve, how we combine talents and skills and specializations. And this is really, really important because this kind of helps us build this sort of T-shaped perspective. And this sort of this T-shaped perspective has been kind of touted now for a couple of decades, going back to the early 90s, where you want people to have generalized skill across the design life cycle and then a specialization, hence the T shape. And this is really, really important because when you understand that across the life cycle, that there are going to be many people that have T-shaped expertise, and specifically certain aspects of expertise that you don't have. So you're going to have engineers, content designers, you're going to have researchers, you're going to have other forms of analysts, strategists, delivery managers, project managers. There's a whole range of skills and capabilities that kind of spread across that kind of life cycle, where every single person has got that T-shaped capability. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to encourage greater generalization across that T-shape, understanding what a developer needs and how they need it, understanding what a content designer needs and when they need it, not being assumptive about, well, this is when we do the content design. It's kind of, we work it out together. And that's a really powerful thing that often motivates people and feels quite fresh. It may sound more long-winded, that it may take more time and more effort. And in some ways, these things may take more time and more effort. But like most things, you get rhythm, then you get acceleration, and then you get accelerated outcomes. And this is really what the whole point of the work is. We're trying to combine different skills and different bits of understanding to be able to deliver content that we know that people really want, that actually will make the experience so much better. And that whole way of thinking about T-shaped practice and T-shaped thinking is kind of underlined by this idea of psychological safety.
Thanks, Si. No, I love that kind of idea of psychological safety, and it's, you know, it's important to collaboration as you kind of illustrate there. Lauren, what are your thoughts on this?
So I'm glad you dropped in psychological safety at the end there, because I think that's essentially the most important ingredient if we're ever going to collaborate well. For me, it means like listening to each other, valuing perspectives, and also being honest and sometimes a bit vulnerable. It's not very comfortable a lot of the time, but it is really important that we're honest with each other. And this really does have to be like a top-down attitude. By having it come from like leaders and managers, we're able then to kind of give permission to everyone else, and it really gives kind of people a feeling of kind of safety for everyone in a team or organization to just kind of be what they are. And I'm saying that it like starts with leaders, but it does also require that we do a little bit of introspection as well. So looking at collaboration again from like an individual level, I recently had a call with someone who, it was like an intro call, and she specifically asked me like how I like to work, and I'd never actually like had anyone ask that of me before. So I was a little bit taken aback, but I really appreciated it, and it's something that I'm definitely going to do moving forward when I'm working with people, because it kind of really made me sit back and think like, what do I actually need to do a good job, and do I actually even get to define this, or I just have to kind of exist within like a kind of preconceived little box that we work in this way and so everyone works in that way. But in order for us to kind of define how we want to work in a team and ask for it, we need to kind of know what we need to begin with. And so for me, I like to begin with like a lot of preliminary conversations in a project, and then I just want to be left in a corner of a room to do some writing. Once I'm done, I can come back to the team and kind of say, look at this thing that I've written, let's tear it apart and have a look at it. But I really need that time alone to do good work. And I also have ADHD, so I'm really distractible, kind of fidgety. And it takes me a bit of a while to kind of recalibrate between tasks and get going. So if I get put in back-to-back meetings all day, or only have like 30 minutes free between those meetings, it's not enough time for me to like get into anything. And I think that's the case for like most people, like neurodivergent or not. But being able to like recognize that is basically just gives you the ability to work around it. And I don't think having ADHD is a bad thing. Like I love it about my brain, but it does mean that I need to kind of think about the way that I work and almost like hack my brain a little bit in order to do good work. And it's one thing to like recognize the things you need, but then also having the confidence to ask for it in the workplace is a very different thing. And that's where kind of psychological safety comes in, because you need to feel like you're in a safe enough space to speak up. You know, it's a really vulnerable thing. It's really important. Even speaking about it in like a forum like this is quite like an intimidating thing as well. But I think really it's that honesty that makes us able to collaborate with people. And so much of the time we're kind of doing this confident person impression, and you kind of hang up or you leave the room and you're left thinking like, that was really weird. Am I the only one who thought that was really weird? And because you're like working remotely, you don't have all those little like micro interactions anymore. Like when we're all working in offices all the time, you know, you can like give each other like a little side eye or kind of shrug or talk about it afterwards. But because people now are kind of scattered and not always working in the same place, like we don't always get the opportunity to kind of go for a beer or a coffee or talk about it in a kind of non-judgmental, non-structured space. You know, you have a call and the call is specifically for a thing and you have to go over that. And it's kind of a tragedy because so many kind of inventions and ideas get like knocked loose in casual conversation, and it's in that kind of less intense, kind of intimate like conversations that we also learn to trust each other as well. You know, we kind of show our human side a little bit as how you build relationships, and we kind of need to find ways of like working harder to replicate those interactions, like especially if we're working remotely. And same thing goes for kind of teaching and mentoring and everything else, where there's so many things that we used to be able to just take for granted, and you can be taught about kind of new tools or techniques over kind of the internet, but there's also a lot that we used to learn through observation, and that could be, you know, how to talk to clients or how to handle difficult conversations and even like body language and that kind of thing. And yeah, we just need to find a way to build it in the world that we're living in now. And kind of the roundabout point I'm making is that there's something really powerful in admitting that you don't know something or pulling back the curtain a little bit to expose your own vulnerabilities and shortcomings. And this transparency helps us to learn from each other, but it's kind of like I said before, it really gives everybody else permission to be as well. And that makes us feel like not only less alone, but it's a really kind of camaraderie building thing. And I always like it when people do that. So being honest, you know, it creates psychological safety. I think it makes us a bit more playful and fun to be around as well, because we're not so closed off and precious about our output. And I think most importantly, when we're honest about like our skill sets and the things that we're kind of maybe a little bit less good at, we give other people an opportunity to really show up on those things, and they get to plug the gaps in our own skill sets. And basically the idea of being T-shaped that Simon talks about, we kind of augment with other people, but we also get to learn from them. And it's only by like being honest about that to begin with that we're actually able to kind of like plus each other and collaborate well.
Thanks, Lauren. No, I totally agree with that. Si, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I mean, let's just dive into the ideas of, say, being open, you know, being honest, and actually trust. And I think that, you know, those ideas kind of underline a lot of what Lauren said. I mean, and they're kind of essential to sort of psychological safety, which is a concept I came across looking at a piece of research by Google called Project Aristotle. And what they did was quite interesting. They did a big analysis of team collaboration, and they were really trying to look at the factors that make up great team collaboration. And what they found was that when teams are able to combine around problems, so they configure or organize themselves, in comparison to teams that are told how to configure, that the organization is implied on them, those which they called work groups, that they tend to not be as effective, not as collaborative, and they don't generate the same level of outcome success and impact that teams do, which is kind of a really big tick for collaborative team working. And one of the things that the kind of research discovered, and this is, you know, where I came across the idea, and there are many books written about the idea now, but this idea of psychological safety, and psychological safety is about trust. It is about allowing people to be who they are, recognizing where they are brilliant without being critical about the things that they're not so brilliant about, because it's not about what people aren't good at. It's about what they're good at. So this is a really simple way of saying it's not really about looking at difference, but really looking at similarity. So if I take that in a practical way for the whole collaboration series, Lauren collaborated with me. She was my writer, in the sense of the person that was able to help me express things better than I can myself, because Lauren is a much better writer than I am. That's one of her uber skills. And I had to make sure that I could work with her in a way that supported how Lauren could do her best work. That doesn't mean that I demand or I want something now. Lauren has multiple commitments within an organization like Nomensa that basically operates at Vader speed. So it's a case of I have to be mindful of how do I get the best work out of Lauren, which is another way of saying, how do I collaborate in the best way with Lauren? And then in doing that, what happens is that Lauren teaches me ways of thinking about things from a collaborative perspective, brings ideas that I didn't have or couldn't think about. And this is the point of great collaboration. This is what it does. It helps you to become something greater than yourself. So this idea of weakness or a lack of ability is really kind of supplanted by being able to work with people that can bring something exciting and rich that actually adds and augments to the total. Again, going back to that, that idea of the gestalt, what we're trying to do when we collaborate is actually become more than just the work that we do ourselves, because that's the opportunity that collaboration affords us.
Thanks, Si. So, I mean, you kind of touched on kind of all like organizational collaboration then, and it'd be good to to hear a bit more kind of about how easy is it for an organization to create this kind of culture of collaboration?
This is a really great question, and it's another one of those tough questions that you ask about what's more important, the steering wheel or the wheels. I think you referred to it as content or experience. So for an organization to really have the ambition to be better at collaboration, they need to think about it strategically. They have to see that collaboration has the potential to provide competitive advantage. And that competitive advantage can be translated into better business, better products, better service. So if you imagine that an organization that is encouraging collaboration for all its people ultimately means that those people can work more effectively. And in our case, if I think about it in terms of an agency where we are, supporting multiple clients with multiple projects and programs every day, it's about, well, how do we collaborate with them? And then ultimately, how do they collaborate with their customers and their markets, which is the ultimate goal that we're aiming for. Of course, we want to be better at collaboration, but we want to be better at collaboration so we can help our clients actually be better at collaboration, because that's what they want as well. So it's a case of, to do that for us, we have to have policies in place and values in place and thinking in place and practices in place that encourage that T-shaped thinking. And when we encourage that T-shaped thinking, we are really talking about building collaboration as a capability. It no longer is just something that we want to build with individuals, but we see it from a Gestalt perspective, where we're thinking about it as something that is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's the kind of way that we go at it. So for us, collaboration is strategic. It's something where we want to lay down policy. It's something that we want to encourage. It's something that our clients will often say to us, we want to collaborate like you collaborate, which is really the ultimate thing that we want to hear. Or the ultimate thing we want to hear is, how can we collaborate better? How can we actually do what we do better? Because we know when we can collaborate better, there will be better outcomes that have better impacts. And that ultimately is the goal of why we're so kind of focused on collaboration.
Thanks, Si. I mean, you kind of hinted at kind of, this kind of one team mentality there. Like Lauren, do you have any kind of thoughts on that?
Yeah, I always have thoughts. Kind of like building on what Simon was saying, I think really obvious and quite often, there's one of these things that's almost so obvious that it's easy to miss, is just kind of having that common language. And the best way to make organizations better at it is just making them use terminology that makes sense to everyone. And I don't mean like having a common language in the sense that everyone needs to speak like English or Spanish or anything like that, but just more that we have definitions that we all work to and we all understand and kind of don't switch around too much. There's lots of examples of things like, so for example, like human-centered design and UX aren't too dissimilar, so you can kind of chop and change and use them in different contexts, and it doesn't really change the definition. But there's also lots of other terms that we kind of just throw around and people don't always know. I remember kind of first starting out my job, like there were so many words that I didn't know and was like, okay, how am I supposed to learn them? And you feel a little bit silly for asking them, but by like having those clearly defined definitions, people can actually work better together. So as an example, like agile, for example, people love to drop agile ceremonies in everywhere, or at least the names for agile ceremonies. So they like stand-ups sound a little bit fancier than just having a daily check-in call, but they're run in a really specific way. And they use retrospectives, so that like they're the same thing as like a wash-up meeting, or that sprint planning is the same as a kickoff, when they're not the same thing at all, and they're specific ways of working. And if we use them interchangeably, like you can confuse people. They don't know what their expectations are or what they're supposed to be doing in those meetings, so things just get quite muddled. There's also a really like pedestrian example that we'll all have probably come across, which is like our job roles. UX job titles are something that is a kind of quite contentious topic, so I'm not going to wade in too far, but depending on the sector that you're working in, I'm a UX writer, but I'm also a content designer. You could be a UX designer or an interaction designer. There are delivery managers, project managers, and they all have really specific roles and responsibilities, and it's not always clear what they are. And often, a content design, for example, has kind of become this catch-all term for all kinds of digital content, and it means something really specific. And when we don't use them in that specific context, there's that kind of misplaced expectation, and people don't know what they're actually being kind of expected to do. And this isn't just me kind of being like being really wrapped up in words. I've seen a few things kind of rile up practitioners more than people who use a stand-up meeting for just generally chatting, or when something that's supposed to be run in an agile way becomes really waterfall-esque in delivery. Our words matter, the language we use matters, and it builds the culture. It communicates purpose internally, and it just helps everyone understand. And it really works in the same way as like a tone of voice document does for a digital experience. The voice that we use has its tendrils all throughout the way that we speak internally as well, and that's to do with like our processes, like all of our internal comms, everything. And there's definitely a lot to say about like industry jargon and agency speak, but having like that commonality in language can be really comforting to people, and having tight definitions for roles and deliverables and processes makes it so much easier to work with people. And it sounds like a content problem, but it's not. I think it's kind of everyone's problem, and it kind of it's obvious for me to kind of be really into language, but it's like, how are we supposed to collaborate with each other if you don't actually understand what the other person's doing? And that has like impact on like sales and recruitment and that kind of thing as well. But it really is ultimately just trying to help each other understand so we can actually work together.
Thanks, Lauren. No, those are some like kind of, some really good examples of best practice. I think, sharing common language is so important. But Lauren, kind of, we've spoken about kind of best practice at an organizational level, but what are your thoughts on, the kind of conditions in an organization that maybe make it difficult to collaborate?
So I think a lot of organizations try really hard to collaborate, and part of the trouble is that the systems and frameworks actually underpinning their organization make it difficult to get things done. Sometimes this can be like a recent, very unhelpful offshoot of remote working, where you kind of physically don't have sight of who's working like in your organization, or you work somewhere that's so large that it's hard to keep track of what projects are going on. You don't know who to get to sign off content, and you don't know who's supposed to be a part of everyday decision making, or who's just kind of there for just semi-regular check-ins just to make sure that everything's running smoothly. You also see organizations that grow really quickly, and then teams are being spun up kind of faster than you can actually like get processes to track them. And also when it's a large organization, that the teams just don't speak to each other, and even though they're part of the same organization, the communication channels just don't really work. And this quite often results in like duplicated efforts and really understandably quite frustrated teams who just feel like their work's not really going anywhere, or kind of that they've been working on something for ages and then find out that a team's already done it and already found the solution for it. It's quite common to have people kind of mistake thinking that having as many people involved as possible is collaborative, and it's a bit of a mistake, because just having like throwing more bodies at a problem isn't going to solve it, and it's not going to make any of those bodies work together better if they don't actually understand what their roles or actions are within that project or within that organization. And not to say that these people aren't working like incredibly hard or that their efforts are invalid, but just that we're not creating conditions where they can like really thrive and actually work well together. You know, they're kind of trudging through mud towards a goal that maybe someone else has solved by the time they get there. Someone mentioned it before, but it's that kind of choreography of people working together that's really crucial in supporting the scalability of a business. For me, this kind of extends to both not only kind of paying attention to the language we use and the attitude that we have when we bring to work, but it's just really, I don't know, by working with like empathy and understanding, we can get those basics right. And once those basics are right, we can then scale that out to bigger teams, because unless we get those foundations, you're not going to be able to collaborate at scale, because you can barely get the team to do what it's supposed to.
Thanks, Lauren. Simon, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the underlying idea around scalability that Lauren's talking about is super critical here, because if I think about the characteristics of, say, strong team collaboration, it's going to be in common goals. It's going to be in well-defined roles of responsibility. It's going to be in allowing them as individuals within the team to act in responsible ways. So these things do need to be defined. And it is important, because then you can scale the collaboration practices quite quickly. I think what Lauren's getting at is that when you've got, say, for example, people that are operating in siloed teams, and they may not know that one team is also kind of doing the work that they're doing, it's frustrating. It's actually, when you raise this up to an organization that you're supporting, it's frustrating for that organization. So it's a case of saying, well, rather than that's wrong, because they can work that out by themselves quite quickly once it's revealed. It's about helping them build that kind of common language, helping them build those frameworks, helping them make sure that they're using words and terminology that do make sense to a greater people, because that's kind of what encourages collaboration. Again, I mean, I think this all goes back to this idea of really trying to build T-shaped thinking and T-shaped practices, really trying to understand how you work with other people, what they do, what your contribution is. And if you could do that in a way where there is common language and common understanding, that tends to sort of lead to a more positive and collaborative outcome.
Thanks, Si. So, I mean, we've kind of spoken about a lot of stuff at kind of a strategic level. But Lauren, this question for you, I'd like to like have you got a kind of favorite collaborative writing tactic? Like what kind of works best for you?
So I really love doing like co-writing. It's also called like pair writing as well, but pair writing is normally with two people, but it's effectively just bringing people into a room to write something together. It's really great for kind of like weaving together what users need and organizations want. And it's really just like a shortcut to getting policy and legal or business requirements into content kind of as you write it, rather than having it kind of shoehorned in later on in the process when you're just kind of trying to get to the sign-off point. One of the things I really love about like co-writing as well is that we as kind of like as writers get to not only kind of like learn about like the technical limitations of a company or kind of the intricacies of how they work, we also get to like work with other practitioners, and then I can become more T-shaped by learning what they do. And for the kind of stakeholders or the client, rather than us just chucking over changes over a fence or trying to squeeze everything into a really horribly annotated Word document with all like the track changes that just look awful, we're able to actually sit and like take the time to walk stakeholders through why we've made changes. And you can explain like why plain English is important, or why things have been structured a certain way, or like why you can't use certain terminology. And this kind of not only gets like buy-in more easily, because people are so much more open to things once they understand why it's happening, but also it means that they can then take those skills and put them into their writing moving forward, so like long after we start working with them. But kind of on the flip side of this, like it only works in a kind of small enough group. So I think like anything beyond 10 gets a little bit hard to manage. And I've seen cases more recently where, well, not even just like over the years, but you have like up to 30 people on a call. And it's a really noble effort, and it's really important to get all of those stakeholders into the room, but it can be quite difficult to then write things all together. It is helpful to have everyone on the call so everyone can weigh in, because it's kind of hard to get sign off from people at certain points. But the main issue is that there are so many attendees that kind of people fall into the background, or they lose attention, or they just don't feel confident enough to speak up. So kind of in my head, this kind of like begs the question of like, can there be too much collaboration, or is it that we're just kind of bringing the wrong people into the room at a certain point? And I think a lot of it comes from people, again, not really knowing what they're responsible for. And the higher the stakes the messaging has, the more urgency and confusion kind of comes to the forefront. People don't want to make the wrong decision. They don't want to sign off something that could have like a really big impact. So we end up just kind of panicking and just being a bit flustered. And creating something like a racy chart is a really good start, but it kind of needs to go beyond just plotting names into a graph. Again, it's that kind of like defining roles and unclogging like communication channels, because it just really means that when we don't know what's happening, we just kind of grab everything, and it just makes us feel quite overwhelmed and unsure of how to progress. So by kind of being really clear with what we're asking of people and what they're kind of expected to do when they come into a session, and kind of keeping them smaller and only engaging people when it's really important, we're able to kind of actually empower them to sort through the noise and only do what they're really kind of responsible for and what we're expecting of them. And it essentially is just like engaging people when it matters. So you can write something that's really important, that you don't waste everyone's time by bringing like 30 people into a call. So it's just basically like a way of like getting user needs baked in while also saving people time. So yeah, paired writing is really good. Well, co-writing is really good, but anything beyond 10 and you're going to be trying to just do it by like jewelry or something, it gets quite complex.
Yeah, no, I think that would probably resonate with almost everyone.
Yeah.
I think we've probably all been in that situation with 30 people in a meeting that probably didn't have to be there.
Yeah, and no one wants to be in the 30 minutes, 30-person meeting when they don't need to be there.
Yeah. So what's your thoughts on that? Have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just go back to the kind of insights that comes from, say, Google's Project Aristotle. So when you allow teams to self-organize rather than impose this is the team, to Lauren's point, you sort of transcend this idea that everyone has to be involved. And because everyone's not involved doesn't mean that those people aren't involved, aren't important, or aren't going to contribute. I mean, I have this in my day-to-day work every day. There's, people will often be quite shocked when I might not be involved in something. So what I have to do is remind them that that's okay, because the other people that are involved with this thing actually, more often than not, are as if not more capable than me, have got this. They bring me in when they need me. And, my job is to be able to recognize how to get out of the way. But that's because I practice collaboration. And I think it can be quite a challenge to do those sorts of things. So an organization that sort of practices collaboration has this characteristic of profound honesty. and profound communication. They just say it as it is. This actually, what we're doing now is anti-collaborative. And not that it's negative, they plus it, it's anti-collaborative, but if we did it like this, because of this, we could achieve that. So you're kind of constantly looking at ways to plus things. But it's again, going right back to the beginning, it's difficult because if you treat collaboration as something that you've got supreme skill at, which then kind of makes it sound a bit like a cognitive bias, like confirmation bias, right? You have to really think, how can I be better at collaboration? What is the value of collaboration? What can I learn from other people about collaboration? So it's like a constant practice. You're always practicing it. You always want to get better at it. But for me, ultimately, it's a superpower that leads to super outcomes.
Awesome. Thanks, Si. And thanks, Lauren, as well. This whole conversation has been, it's been super, super insightful. And I loved, I was loving what you're saying about, how collaboration is this, incredibly powerful tool that, individuals, teams, organizations can harness to be kind of more effective, innovative, profitable, and, our abilities as humans to kind of create, ideate, build, multiply when, working in these diverse, cohesive teams with kind of complementary T-shaped skill sets. I love what you're chatting about, the gestalt where the whole is kind of far greater than the sum of its parts. And kind of, as like with Cathedral, kind of experience and content cannot kind of live without one another. They're kind of interdependent. Thank you. That was brilliant. If anyone has any questions, please do submit them now using the Q&A function. I know there's been a few comments in the chat. I think about kind of psychological safety and safe spaces for collaboration, which is great. But yeah, if anyone does have any questions, please do drop them in the Q&A. In the meantime, Simon, I mean, you've mentioned this kind of concept as kind of plussing before, and I think you mentioned earlier to me that was from is that a concept from Pixar? Could you kind of explain a bit more around that?
Yeah, so it's an idea that I got from Pixar, and again, hat tip here to Lauren. She kind of helped me express it in the collaboration series as sort of criticism with a twist. So instead of it just being negative and destructive, it's more positive. So an example would be someone says something to you, and rather than just instantly saying what's wrong with it, why it won't work, and what's not good about it, which kind of would make you think, they say they're active listening, but are they really? As well as if you are active listening, what happens is you listen to it and you say, okay, I understand what you're saying there. Could you also apply it like this? Does it mean it could be like that? You build on top of an idea. So it's not just shot down. And what then happens is that things go off in quite interesting places, where they start and where they end up can be quite beautifully divergent and interesting. And again, this is sort of one of the things that I think is a characteristic of sort of people that practice collaboration. They're always plussing things. I mean, we do it a lot at Nomensa. I mean, we do it a lot in how we think about it. I'm trying to always encourage that. It's this idea that nothing is ever wrong or right, but everything can be thought about and everything can be improved upon, which means, to put it in the most basic way, the things that I think, that's why I say them, because I'm looking for my colleagues to actually show me better ways of thinking about things. So it truly is like a way to get the very best out of people's, skills and talents.
Thanks, Si. Lauren, have you got anything to add to that?
I mean, I really like plussing as a kind of activity. I think it's really easy to kind of find the issue with a thing, but it's a lot harder to find the solution or kind of find a positive thing to say. So it's also got a nice way of like even being like, I'm just going to piggyback on that. It's like a nice way of communicating with people, and also like working, and especially in like meetings, for instance, where you're able to like build on another colleague's opinion without actually making them like look bad. It's just a nice way of working, I think, and it's definitely something that I've tried and do in my job as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So we don't have any more questions in, and I think we're kind of nearing the end now. I see Toto's joined you there, Si.
Chief collaborator has been pouring me, sat behind me all the way through this presentation, plussing me, encouraging me, as puppies do.
Oh yeah, I'm very jealous. But yeah, thank you everyone that tuned in. Again, Lauren and Simon, thank you. That was super insightful.
Thank you.
Our next webinar is on the 15th of March. We'll have details of that released very soon. So just keep an eye on our social media channels for details on that. That'll be released very soon. So yeah, we hope to see you all back there again. And thank you again. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.